Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. This is part 2 of our 2-part series on Kabbalah and quantum physics. With me is Fred Alan Wolf, also known as Dr. Quantum. Fred is the author of numerous books, including The Body Quantum, Taking the Quantum Leap, Space, Time, and Beyond, The Spiritual Universe, Parallel Universes, The Dreaming Universe, Matter into Feeling, Mind into Matter, The Yoga of Time Travel, Time Loops and Space Twists, How God Created the Universe. Welcome again, Fred.
Very good, Jeff. A lot of titles to read off there.
I
Yes.
know you have written so much. It's been your lifelong passion to make quantum physics accessible not only to the general public, but also going a step further and looking at the relationship between quantum physics and consciousness.
Yes, my driving interest has been that relationship. In particular, the special role that human beings play in that relationship, because what both Kabbalah and quantum physics seem to be pointing to in their own different ways, but nevertheless in the same direction, is that the human being is something essential and different and important in the manifestation of what we call this universe.
Yeah.
And later on, maybe in our next
in our series about consciousness and space and time,
we're going to be talking a little bit about space and time and consciousness and the illusion that we call the universe, and why I would use the term illusion when I myself am a hardcore quantum physicist. But that's another topic.
Well, you are a hardcore quantum physicist. You've been a professor at various colleges and universities around the world. But you gave up your academic career in order to become an explorer of consciousness. You studied with shamans and mystics and yogis everywhere, and you've combined this intense pursuit of mystical awareness with your knowledge of modern physics.
Yeah, that's been kind of the driving thing. I think the one thing that I have that is both a blessing and kind of maybe annoying to some others is curiosity. I always want to know, well, what is that? Why is that? What's going on here? And I'm not just satisfied with a purely abstract explanation. It's got to grab me in some way. When I do work, even in developing equations, it's more than just the mathematics that intrigues me. It's, what does that mean? What's the meaning of that? What does that have to do with my life, with anybody's life, with being a human being? These are always things that intrigue me.
Yeah.
So that's been the driving, might say, force. I'm a curious being.
Well, if I were to summarize what I see as sort of the Kabbalistic relationship to physics, it's something like this, that Kabbalah focuses on what we call sometimes the descent of spirit into matter, and then the ascent of matter back up to spirit.
Yes, that is a wonderful insight, and that was the essential insight that Carlos Suarez gave me when I spent time with him in Paris, working with him on the translation of the Cipher of Genesis. He said, there is an equation here. He said, I don't know if this is really a mathematical equation, but it's got some kind of movement to it. And he looked at it the following way. He said that what a human being is at the center of the spiritual Aleph, sending a lightning bolt, which he called Sheen, or the breath of God, into the material form, which was a sea, a water, mem, which means water, of consciousness, and that then sends back another lightning bolt, which is called seen, which is the opposite of sheen, but they're the same letter, but pronounced differently.
Yes.
And that goes back into Aleph again. When you look at sheen and look at its spectrographic interpretation, or how it looks, it's spread out. It's
how
diffuse.
the letter looks when you pronounce it,
It-
and take a voice print.
A voice print, a spectrographic voice print,
Yeah.
which gives you the frequency, the intensity, and time over which the letter is pronounced, and look to see what that looks like, and compare it with its opposite, which is seen. Same letter, but in Hebrew you put dots in various places on the letter, and that tells you whether it's pronounced one way or another way.
Yeah.
And when it's pronounced seen, it looks like a particle. So you have wave coming from Aleph, which means in interpretation, spirit, God, the universe, manifest by giving a wave of all possibilities, manifesting into consciousness, which then delivers back to Aleph a thing, a thought, a presence, an actual event. So that's the whole cycle of Aleph, Mem, Sin, Shin, which is what he thought was E equal MC squared. And in a way, he was right. You've got E, which is the Aleph, and you got M, which is the water, and C squared is the speed of light times multiplied by itself. So it's CC. So that's one C going one way and one C going the other way. And that, by the way, is pretty close to what is an interpretation of quantum field theory. It's amazing to me when I began to see these things that there was this tie, because he knew nothing about quantum physics or anything about quantum field theory or anything like that, but yet he was coming to these conclusions from a whole different side of the universe, the spiritual, mystical.
All right, let's
Kabbalistic.
review that now. It sounds
Okay.
pretty important. What he's suggesting, or maybe I'm misinterpreting, let me know if I am, the descent of matter into, the descent of spirit into matter, and then the ascent of matter back up to spirit is equivalent somehow to E equals MC squared, which is the basis of quantum field theory.
Which is, it's a very basic equation. In fact, we didn't realize how basic it was. I mean, when Einstein first came up with that idea, he had no idea. He himself didn't realize the portent, the potency of just that idea, and how it is a basis of quantum field theory.
It's also the basis of the nuclear bomb.
It's the basis of a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Definitely the nuclear bomb, and we can talk about that a bit if you'd like. But the thing which makes it interesting is something that comes up when you realize what quantum field theory is saying. The thing which makes it interesting is that matter itself is nothing but some kind of condensed energy, and that matter itself is not kind of quote-unquote real, but it comes about through some kind of mixture of quantum fields. In fact, the Large Hadron Collider built by CERN in Switzerland, primary purpose was to find out how that mixture was taking place. Because what we physicists, quantum field theorists now believe is that there is no inherent matter. What there is just a mechanism by which something gains the appearance of matter through the interaction of something called a Higgs field, which interacts and produces a matter field. It's a very interesting concept. We can maybe get into that if you want later.
Well, it sounds very technical to me, and I know there was a lot of talk recently about the Higgs boson and the so-called God particle, or some people call it the goddamn particle, I think. But in any case, what your point is that matter itself is a condensed form of energy. It
is. That's a one way to look at it. I don't quite use that terminology. What I see is that matter is it arises from fields interacting. And these fields themselves are not material. They're ethereal in some way.
Probabilistic fields.
Yes, they're all over the place, but they're fields.
Yes.
And if you want to get a picture of what a field looks like, if you ever have watched a field of grain when the wind is blowing, and you see how it moves, the waves move the fields of grain back and forth. That's a kind of a metaphorical picture of what we mean by a field. It's something which fills the whole space, and the wind is kind of the field itself. You don't actually see the wind. You just see what its effect is on the fields of grain.
Well, and most of the viewers who are watching this video at the moment when they're watching it, not the moment when we're recording it, are able to hear us and see us by virtue of electromagnetic fields.
Exactly, exactly. And the electromagnetic field is one which has been studied so thoroughly that we began to formulate a theory, a field theory, called quantum electrodynamics, which is the interrelationship or interaction between electrons and light. And out of that came a remarkable insight, which was called the fundamentals of quantum field theory, which was then extended well into the subnuclear domain, which is the field of quarks and whatnot. And as soon as you got out of light and electrons and you got into this minuscule quarkian world, it became so complicated. And there were many sweepings under the rug of infinities which came to keep cropping up, and we're still playing with that.
Well, one of the important insights I gather is that consciousness has a role here in determining how these fields manifest themselves.
It definitely does, and this is an insight which in saying this, I'm sort of putting myself into the realm of great speculation, but I think that without consciousness, the whole notion of time would not even occur. And so you wouldn't have all of the basic symmetries which arise through time itself being one of these kinds of symmetries, and that it comes about through consciousness itself. And as the consciousness is a form of field, it's not a form of field. It's kind of like Aleph itself. That Aleph is a form of consciousness which includes unconsciousness.
Now, Aleph is a mystical letter in a way.
It's a mystical letter, and it seems to be the best description of what this field is like. It's hard to define because the minute you start talking about it in terms of human terms, it becomes not only mystical, but it becomes metaphorical. And the problem is the mathematical structures of even quantum field theory don't allow you to always stretch into metaphor. They seem to be troubling for scientists to try to make metaphors out of the concepts.
That's why sometimes you hear the mantra in physics, shut up and calculate.
That's exactly, shut up and calculate, because if you try to think about these things too much, you're going to be off into the into the weirdo stuff. And
but there are similar restrictions around Kabbalah. It's as I understand it, in the traditional Jewish communities, one was not supposed to even begin studying Kabbalah until you were at least 40 years old.
Yes, that is interesting. And I understand that there's some people that women were not supposed to study this stuff. But that's old prejudicial thinking.
Sure.
I don't think that has really anything to do with the Kabbalah itself. Because Kabbalah is a study of the meaning of the Hebrew letters and their pronunciation. And in studying Kabbalah, one evokes the feeling mode, the feeling tone, the intuition becomes evoked. Your thinking is changed. Your ability to sense the world around you is changed. So these various modes of which we call being a human being, thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuiting, those are the primary modes about which we function on the world, they all get enhanced, changed, reformed, transformed as a result of understanding some of the implications that Kabbalistic thinking implies.
Well, I gather one of the approaches of Kabbalah, when they say, and God said, let there be light, and there was light, it's the idea of the spoken word having a certain power.
Exactly. And this is another interesting parallel that I want to draw here. The Hebrew word for word is out. It's spelled Aleph Vav Tav, or in English it'd be A-U-T. Like O-U-T, but A-U-T. And when you look at what that means, Kabbalistically thinking, you have the spiritual, Aleph, disseminating, giving birth to possibilities itself, but ending in Tav, which is the final letter of the Hebrew Aleph Beit, and it means cosmic resistance. It's the wall by which you don't go. So what does that wall do? It reflects it back.
Yep.
So you have the word is a reflection back of the spiritual dissemination. So the fact that we can make words is the reflection back. It's our way of dealing with the dissemination from Aleph. So that's what the word is.
In other words, every word has a certain spiritual power embedded in it.
It absolutely does, but in the English language and the so-called descriptive languages, that's lost. It's only in these other kinds of languages, what Suarez called projective languages, where projection from the word into the various feeling, thinking, intuiting, sensing tones become important. And the Kabbalist masters knew this. Suarez certainly knew it. And it's lost. And maybe some of the ancient Sanskrit also had this ability of each letter being a word. I'm not sure. I've never really studied Sanskrit.
Or sacred languages in general.
Sacred languages in general, yes.
Yeah.
Native American may have this as well.
I mean, I interviewed a Kabbalistic thinker, Stan Turum, who believes that every letter was sort of like a dance gesture, a hand movement associated with each of the Hebrew letters.
Yes, I know. It's a very interesting thing he's come up with. It's his own discovery, and it's brilliant in a way.
But now back to the idea of basically the quest of humans on a spiritual quest is to take our material being, ourselves, and elevate ourselves back up to spirit.
Yes and no. There's a reason that matter is here.
Yeah.
There's a reason for having material existence. And the reason is to not necessarily give it back to Aleph, but to embody Aleph within it. Suarez called it the war with time. And since time is also consciousness, you might call it the war with consciousness. That we're, in a sense, battling, that consciousness is a field of battle that is going on. That's why there's so much negativity, chaos, insanity, people saying things that seem totally ridiculous, evoking all kinds of emotion. These are parts of the battle which come out. And so the whole point of this war with consciousness is to begin to use words that can give a victor in the battle, but not a victor in the sense of killing the other, but a victor in sense of giving meaning, so that one understands where the war, how the battlefield got drawn in the first place. This is an old story. It's in the Bhagavad Gita. It's the same story that was told when Krishna appeared to the king I can't remember his name.
Arjuna.
Arjuna. When Krishna came to Arjuna, the warrior. Arjuna
king, yes.
He's had this war with conscience. He has to go to battle with his family on the other side of whatever it was. And Krishna assures him that is, that battle has been fought and over again. Don't worry about it. Think of be involved with Krishna. And Arjuna says, what does that mean? And then suddenly Krishna appears to him as 1,000 billion faces brighter than 1,000 suns. Yes. And what Arjuna notices is that many of those faces are the faces of Arjuna. Mm-hmm. So Krishna is telling Arjuna, you are Krishna too.
So, and what you're saying is then that the mystical teachings of Kabbalah are similar to the mystical teachings of Hinduism.
I think there's a great tie there, more than I think either side is willing to admit.
Well, I've sometimes heard it said that Abraham and Brahma are related.
I think Suarez also mentioned that, by the way. He thinks there's definitely a relationship there, and I'm convinced of it because I've spent a lot of time in India. I've made 4 trips there. I was with the Dalai Lama the last time he invited a bunch of so-called
mystical scientists.
I don't know. I don't know why we were chosen, but certain numbers of us were chosen. Gene Houston, I think, was there. A number of other luminaries in the field were there, and I was invited to go along and to meet with him. And I just noticed certain similarities between the kinds of argumentation that is used in the teaching of the Buddhist ideas. They argue the ideas, like in a school, like in a Hebrew school, or a school where you're learning the mysticism, yeshiva, whatever that is.
Well, I suppose when philosophers of all cultures come together, they begin to argue these points.
I think so.
It's a big part of Jewish tradition, of course, but one finds it in Vedanta and in Buddhism as well.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. And that parallel definitely was something I noticed there. Anyway, when I talk with Indian philosophers about various things, they resonate with the idea of Kabbalah. They don't find that foreign to them at all. It kind of makes sense.
How do they relate to the notion that you write about matter into feeling?
Well, I haven't really found out how they relate to that. Matter into feeling, I thought would be a natural extension of mind into matter, and that would immediately garner a lot more attention, because I go into more detail about the sensation, feeling, intuition, thinking, how those all arise, and how even how space and time and matter get generated from rather than saying, as modern science tend to do, that the subjective tones are arising from the materialistic objective tones of the world. For example, thinking is nothing more than neural meanderings in the brain, and so forth. This takes a counter. It says that the subjective elements, feeling, intuiting, thinking, and sensing, are the generators of space, time, matter, and energy.
They come first.
First, the primary is feeling, thinking, intuiting, and sensing, and then you can show by certain combinations from these various primary modes how space, time, momentum, energy get generated.
In other words, that's your resolution of the mind-body problem.
My measure of the mind-body problem is very simple. Mind is first, matter comes second. And that resonates very strongly with the Hindu tradition.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
So when I came up with this, I didn't know the Hindu tradition, but now when I speak to Hindus about it, they resonate with this idea.
Well, otherwise you're stuck in this paradox, which has been the bane of Western philosophers for thousands of years. How can inert matter that possesses no consciousness of its own, according to all of our physical theories, how can it be that we, material creatures, have consciousness, have feelings, have thoughts?
Right.
It's a great mystery, unless you find a resolution such as the one you've come up with.
Yes. When I wrote a book, the book that I wrote, The Dreaming Universe, I introduced it by saying, well, if the materialists are right, then how do you explain how meat dreams?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, it's as ridiculous as you could possibly think, but there is the whole materialist conundrum in a knot.
Well, you know, I did an interview with a prominent materialist, Marvin Minsky, one of the pioneer computer scientists and a brilliant man.
Brilliant guy.
And he looked at me and he said, "You should be proud of being meat."
That's wonderful.
Then I wonder, how is it that meat can experience pride?
That's the question. That's the question. The question, again, is which is fundamental? And one of the problems that I think will be approached more definitely in the next 100 years is the whole problem of subjectivity. Because I think it's a primary thing that needs to be studied.
Yes.
It needs to be understood better. It may even help us get rid of many of the social and psychological problems which seem to be arising in culture. If we understood better what the subjective experience is like, if we understood from behavioral characteristics why human beings think, intuit, sense, and feel the ways they do.
Well, Fred Alan Wolf, what a pleasure sharing another half hour with you. You really exemplify in your discussion why a person such as yourself, a quantum physicist, would turn to Jewish mysticism, to Kabbalah, to seek certain answers. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you, Jeffrey. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you for being with us.